Welcome back for another book review. Today we are talking about this one. So this is Light Magic for Dark Times, More Than 100 Spells, Rituals, and Practices for Coping in a Crisis by Marie Basile? Sometimes these last names, I don't know. So this is one of those books that when I got it from the library, my husband immediately was like, I feel like that's gonna be a bad one. And I'm like, probably. And needless to say, yeah, it's a 2-star for me. So the taglines, I feel like they should matter to a book, right? But like, this isn't a book for crisis. This is a book for like your basic, like having a bad day kind of a book. Like, this is like, you don't already have issues. Like, if you have never dealt with depression, anxiety, things hitting the fan ever, they might have some things for you. But if you've gone to like your most basic counselor and like Googled anything, it's the same stuff. And this book, like, there's nothing in it for a crisis. Absolutely nothing. Like, nothing in here is like gonna get you through it, especially as a witch. Like, there was so little actual witchcraft in here that it was like, how is this a book on witchcraft though? Like, it wasn't a book on witchcraft. I know that Kellyanne Maddox had talked about how she's writing a book kind of on this topic of like witching through dark times, and obviously what she's gone through now, it's gonna have a section, I'm sure. But like, I feel like she, even in her videos, has covered working witchcraft with a crisis more than this book has. And I know it's not fair to pit like author to author. I mean, granted, it's her videos, but still, she's not technically an author. But like, pitting people against each other for their content, but like, Kellyanne easily includes psychology right alongside witchcraft in like a seamless way. This author does not. Like, this book, like, the self-care tips are so generic. And it's so much of just like a quick Google search tells you what it is. Of like, have you tried to like have like positive affirmations to get through things? And like, if you're going through an actual crisis, that's not gonna help you, to be honest. Like, you're not gonna sit there and be like, oh yes, I'm fine, everything's fine. And like, it's so watered down. It's your basic self-care tips that like, definitely for just like a rainy day, maybe if you've never tried it, and like, be warned, like, it's just a Google search away. Like, there's, on that front, absolutely nothing of help. The other thing is that this book tries in some ways to be too accessible and also fails at that. So like, the thing is, like, so much of this is, but this, but this, but this, but this, and at some point you just have to take a stance, because by trying to include all, you exclude everybody. Because you're just like, you can't try and drive every single road at the same time. Eventually you gotta pick a path. And so that got really old, but also while the author is doing this, it's completely excluding like half the population, because the only people the author mentions is women, and I think the word she had used was like femme people. And I'm like, that's cool, so men don't go through crisis? Like, I know that we're trying to be like gender neutral. I'm on that camp of like, gender doesn't need to be involved for like 90% of things. Like, men and women go through the same things. Like, we could just remove gender out of it in a book, you know, on witchcraft. And so like, there's a lot of gendering things in the craft anyways that I'm not a big fan of. But like, this book constantly, and I'm like, dude, a book for crisis as a witch, why are you excluding, again, like half the population? And I know for the craft, there aren't as many male witches, but there's a decent amount. Every group I've ever gone to, it's pretty equal of men and women in attendance. Stores, same thing. You go to a witchcraft store, there's pretty much always an equal amount of employees and customers, men and women. Readers, same deal. Like, you go to like Pagan Pride, back when we used to have that here, because it's just gone now, which sucks. But like, even then, the booths, pretty equal, women and men. And so like, why are we excluding men from this conversation? It makes no sense. And it's different if you're talking about like specific things that only happen to women, but even then, like, men could still be involved. For instance, let's use miscarriage as an example, because, like, men don't have a uterus, and we're not putting trans in front of the title right now. Just men in general do not have the ability to have a child. And I'm pretty sure trans, it gets a little complicated, but right now, you're not in this conversation, I'm sorry. Typically, women are the ones who experience a miscarriage. And so, like, I could see how you would have that as, like, a woman-only experience. Again, some men who are trans go through that. It's a very tedious process because you gotta undo some of your transition to have the baby and then the after, and then you resume stuff. It's a whole complicated thing. But for the most part, it's gonna be women who have the baby. And so, like, you're not including the men in that crisis moment, right? Because it's, like, supposed to just be the woman, but the dude also had the, like, future planned of this child existing, and now it's not. Like, it's still a crisis on both fronts, especially if it was a wanted child, and it wasn't, like, a whoops-a-daisy and then things go wrong, and you're like, well, I guess that's not happening, can, like, take a breath, but it's still a traumatic thing to go through. And, like, that's the only thing that I could be like, kind of maybe-ish, because otherwise, any crisis could happen to a man or a woman or anything in between. Like, why is it always, like, the whole book, the whole thing was women, and again, I'm pretty sure it was, like, femme, and I'm like, okay, so what, like, it only includes, like, women in, like, either it's trans women or, like, the more, like, you know, gay men, like, it does, like, why? Or, like, if you're a drag queen, maybe, does that include you? But, like, it doesn't make any sense. It's so stupid. Why? If you're trying to be so inclusive and, like, so much of, like, every road taken, why are you excluding all of the men? It made no sense, and, like, as a woman, I was really offended for not having the inclusion of men. Like, again, that's the one thing I don't love about, like, witchcraft and a lot of paganism. It's very, like, gendered into it. So why are we excluding? I don't know. It was a, like, really big nitpick of mine. Plus, there was a lot of activism in this book that I didn't feel like was really appropriate when you're going through a crisis. When you're going through a crisis, you're just trying to get through it, and having these super basic self-care tips that, again, is like a Google search away of, like, again, because it's like, just go touch grass. And, like, it's kind of a sarcastic saying, especially online. Like, the younger generations, like Gen Z and, like, Gen Alpha, have been using that as, like, kind of an insult of, like, you need to go touch grass. But, like, it's kind of true, but that's, like, such a bare minimum of, like, dealing with something, dealing with a crisis. And again, I'm using that tagline. If you're gonna put it on the cover of your book and that be your main marketing line, and, like, even then, like, Light Magic for Dark Times, I thought it was just gonna be, like, your typical law of attraction book, but it wasn't even that. Like, it was not my favorite. Is it the worst thing written? No. The one book still holds that title, but it's still not great. So anyways, those are my thoughts on this book. I would love to hear yours. If you do have a good book for witching through a crisis of any kind, I would love to hear about it in the comments down below. Huge thank you to my patrons. I'll have their names here on the screen. If you'd like to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Make sure to like and subscribe. I post every single day, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and bless be.